The NWSL has had a very active offseason, and we're going to be ranking transfer moves. Players coming in, players going out, some really interesting signings, trades, and we've seen some big names both enter the NWSL and possibly leave once again. Welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Tuesday, January 13th. We are so excited to be back to be talking another big year of women's soccer. And we're going to start with the NWSL to see what the heck has been going on with what's going to be a 16-team season in 2026. Let's dig in. We are back. And soon enough, so is the NWSL. The short offseason has flown by. The WSL transfer window closes in a few weeks. NWSL preseason is starting as soon as the end of this week. And we're going to be seeing a slightly different club landscape for the NWSL in 2026, expanding to 16 teams for the first time. Honestly, wild as someone who's been covering this league for a while. It's pretty incredible to think that we've gotten here to a league of this size. 16, I think, was always like the dream. And here we are. We've already seen some shifts in the transfer market that, maybe promise some rising and some falling for individual clubs as we figure out kind of who made the right moves and who proved to make too much change or not enough change in the offseason. We obviously have had some huge continued back and forth about this high impact player rule, what that's going to be. It seems like that's kind of been stuck in this holding pattern, which good, because I don't think it's very well considered. But I just want to talk transfer tracker transactions, the stuff that has stuck out to me. And I want to rank them, because that's what we do on this show, into things that I think, some moves that I thought were really good, some moves that I thought were pretty good, some moves that make me go, And then just at the end, we're going to hit a couple college signings that I really liked, because I know that we don't always get a chance to highlight those in our post-draft reality. So let's start with the good, the big stamp of approval, obvious good stories. I think the big one that we have to start with, we knew this was coming, and yet it's still great to get on the books. Sophia Wilson is returning to Portland through 2026. Her future was obviously one of the biggest question marks hanging over Portland this season, and there's no reason to hedge on the importance of getting that deal done. Securing Wilson's player option, nothing but a huge win. Really important to retain that player for club and for the league. She will be the top paid player over one single season. Again, she already kind of held that title with her last deal, or I guess the original deal that this is an extension of. She'll be getting $1 million for 1 year, and then has the chance to renegotiate with whoever she pleases at the end of this season. It was hard to gauge initially when this contract was first constructed if that player option was an escape hatch, if we were just going to see that option get turned into sort of a free agency. For Wilson, it seems like it maybe turned out to just be sort of a renegotiating period, which I think is very positive for both player and for club. Says good things about where the Thorns are at, that Wilson didn't look elsewhere in the NWSL. There are still some question marks to this, I think, with Portland overall, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's the time limit. Obviously, this is a 1-year extension. It's a lot of money to retain one of the best forwards in the league for 1 year without a ton of promises for the future. Wilson could start this process all over again, or they might try to extend her even further. I think that this doesn't give them a ton of time to enjoy getting this particular part of the deal done. A major investment in sort of a win now mode, or at least let's set the foundation for the future mode in 2026 before she becomes an unrestricted free agent again. Wilson, as we know, has personal reasons to want to stay put. Coming back from pregnancy, there's reasons to want to stay in the NWSL, where maybe Europe wasn't the option right now for her. But this wasn't some sort of long commitment to Portland outside of just this year. And there are other questions circling the club. Who's going to be their head coach? Can they recover from other departures, which we'll talk about in a second? What does the defense look like? But no matter what, this is a huge dub for both the Thorns and the NWSL, and we should underline that, because we talk enough about the things that we think are going wrong. That's one really nice thing that went right. But also in Portland's world, Sam Coffey is reported to be in serious talks with Manchester City for over $875,000 per The Guardian and ESPN. So Sam Coffey, another one on this list of U.S. Women's National Team stars who is looking. I'm going to act like this is happening. Coffey is literally in England right now. I think this is going to happen. If something strange occurs between now and this getting out, maybe, we'll double back. But I think this is going to happen. And I put this in the good because I do think it's good for some people. It's certainly going to be great for Manchester City, who look like serious contenders for the WSL title this season, and maybe even with greater ambitions beyond that. It also seems really good for Coffey, who has never had a chance to play in Europe since being drafted by the Thorns in 2022. She's been pretty consistent that she'd like to have that opportunity one day. If you're a U.S. Women's National Team fan, there are a ton of reasons to be excited about this, about a player like that getting this experience. I thought it was interesting that sources on her end emphasized to ESPN that this wasn't about money in the context of a salary cap. Coffey is under contract with the Thorns. This would be releasing her from that contract for a transfer fee. It's not so much about personal salary, though $875,000, as we know, is still even kind of low for a player of her stature in terms of that transfer fee. I think that's a little bit closer to the highway robbery that Chelsea got away with for Alyssa Thompson, more than what maybe was a more fair offer at the time for Naomi Girma. But I think maybe the more surprising thing in terms of the context of her move to the WSL at all is that she's going to City. I thought Coffey, as we maybe all did, was destined for the Arsenal midfield, considering she's a lifelong fan. But that City project is very intriguing. I'm curious what the bidding war looked like there. From a larger league perspective, this one feels a little bit different maybe than some of the other defections from the NWSL we've seen in the last year. It feels more like a move that we've actually seen more classically in the past, where players want to test themselves out in Europe after multiple good seasons, winning seasons in the NWSL. It certainly would improve the league's prospects if some of that other reporting of like maybe Bay FC or anybody else could get a deal done for Catarina Macario, who is probably on the move away from Chelsea at the end of this season. That is about the money mechanisms, probably more than Coffey going away. But while I'm not afraid to hit the alarm bells, I do want to always contextualize some of these moves. And I think Coffey going out is less of a, oh, there's another one for the exact same reasons as some of these other players, but it's more just putting that impetus on the NWSL to be competitive for players coming back in. If you're going to naturally have these U.S. Women's National Team players who are interested in getting other experiences after a lot of years in the NWSL. Catarina Macario coming in would be great. If unattached Trinity Rodman could be attached sometime soon, that would also be great. So from a league perspective, I'm not freaking out just yet on this one in particular. It's more of a wait and see of what does the other shoe dropping look like. But this sucks for Portland, losing a player like Coffey. There's no doubt. This is a team in a very interesting position right now. They land the Sophia Wilson extension. They're still hiring a new coach. They're working on a very ambitious training facility. And they've also lost their captain and best midfielder. What does that look like for Portland going into 2026? Coffey gave them a hell of a season last year to limited benefit with the other roster and tactical things they still needed to hammer out as a club. So this one is sad for NWSL fans, but I put this again in a different bucket than the other ones. If you look at it kind of from the player's perspective of getting an experience that she's always wanted to have, the fact that Portland, I don't know if they're any closer to an NWSL championship going into this year than they have been the past couple of years. Obviously, the addition of Wilson would help, but they have some leadership things they have to figure out. I think they're still figuring out that larger infrastructure, that stable infrastructure after their sale to new ownership recently. There's a lot for the Thorns to figure out here. And I think Coffey stepping away provides clarity for both player and maybe actually for club to be able to figure some of those things out on their own. So this one I just find kind of interesting from a soccer perspective, as opposed to maybe some of the larger league level issues. The salary cap, I don't think is why Sam Coffey is leaving the NWSL. I do think the salary cap is why it limits clubs' ability to replace a player like Coffey. But moving to the pretty good, there's good and then the pretty good. Another piece of news that broke this week is that we'll talk about a player coming into the NWSL, right? U.S. Women's National Team captain Lindsey Heaps has signed with Denver Summit through 2029, starting at the end of Lyon's season in June. So she'll be joining mid-NWSL season. She's going to be finishing out this year with Lyon and then making the leap back to the NWSL. More than anything, I think this is a nice story and an important centerpiece signing for an expansion team trying to set the tone, not only with ticket holders and again with sort of that storytelling, but also on the field. Heaps gets to go home to play in front of her family after a lot of years abroad, a chance to build something with a brand new club that's shown pretty significant ambitious. This is nice. This is nice with a capital N. I like this story. But we also have to measure some of the on-field expectations and sort of recontextualize this move in the context of other U.S. Women's National players going in the other direction. This is functionally, I'm not saying I'm not, trying to dictate terms or anything, but if you look at the context of this contract that Heaps is walking into with Denver, it's probably a retirement contract. She's 31 years old. By the end of the 2029 season, she'll be 35. It's set for the end of that 2027-28 international cycle plus one NWSL only year. We've seen that playbook a bunch of times for players where they want to put themselves in a situation to be open for consideration for this final international cycle. I'm sure we all know that's not a given, but she wants to be in that conversation plus one NWSL only year, 35 years old. It really feels like Heaps here is mapping out how she would like her career to end. And I love it. I think it's the perfect way to wrap up what truly has been an incredibly successful soccer career. So from that standpoint of setting the tone, experience, leadership, a lot of probably tactical awareness, stuff like that, that's great. But she's not going to be a heavy contributor on the field for Denver forever, even necessarily through the lifetime of this contract. And she won't be there for a lot of the early stuff this season as she finishes out the Euro calendar with Lyon. Gonna have to readjust to the NWSL's pace of play, though I ironically always felt like Heaps maybe played a little bit more consistently week in and out for club than in sort of that limited international environment. No-brainer signing for Denver, but I also just don't think this is I'm talking about all these contexts, right, of Coffey going out, of Heaps coming in. This one, in addition, is not the same as a young superstar like Alyssa Thompson or Naomi Girma going the other way. This is a player with a deep NWSL background who has won many things at the NWSL level before going to Europe to get a different experience and is now coming back with perhaps different goals and futures than the players who in the past year have gone in the other direction. Not a grand counterpoint to the players leaving, but perhaps a more fitting inverse to what we talked about earlier with Coffey. Won a lot at the NWSL level, wanted to experience Europe, and now by nature of being from the US, would like to close out a career here. That is a balanced experience. That is like, I know that there's an ebb and flow to it all, but I think if you look at the grand whole of Heaps' career, it's kind of what you would want for a US Women's National Team player. Put the roots down in the US, really succeed again at the NWSL. She was a very good NWSL player for a long time. Go get that European experience, get something else. As we know, Heaps loves it in Europe. She said this multiple times. And then you come back and you put the roots back down for something stronger as the league continues to grow and change. So I just think it's interesting, like I said, not a direct counterpoint to any of the other things that are happening, but perhaps an example of what a soccer fan or a US soccer fan might hope for the world of the US Women's National Team player in this global market. And then the one other thing I want to hit for the pretty good, a kind of a sneaky, interesting offseason. This was truly breaking news as we sat down to record. I am really interested in what Chicago is doing this offseason. They signed defender Michelle Alozia. They successfully get Alyssa Nair to re-sign for one more year while also setting up Katie Lund as a longer-term option. They signed Brianna Pinto in the midfield. The team is trying. And I'm not sure we can actually say that about Chicago over the last couple of years. Just this morning, this is just an interesting one. They send Lushmila to San Diego for a whole lot of money, $800,000 plus $200,000 in conditional funds, where the overvalue of the deal could possibly become $1 million. Not a great hold for them on the field. They need goal scorers, but you take that deal for a 31-year-old forward any day of the week. Interesting move by San Diego. They've had some ins and outs too. I'm not entirely sure what direction they're going in. That's making out gangbusters for the Stars. Now, the impetus is now on them to figure out what they do with it, but that's a lot of money. And I don't know if the Stars can get themselves out of the league basement next season, but this is going to be a more ambitious off season from them, certainly that we've seen in the last few years. They will be getting Mel Swanson back. They fully anticipate that. That's the messaging we've gotten from the club. They've announced a new training facility. They're trying to get established at a new venue in Evanston on the north side of Chicago for multiple years in the future. It ain't the most, but it does seem like they're putting some resources into improving on the field for the first time, basically, since new ownership took over. So maybe this is some homerism from me, but I would like to think that this interesting offseason turns into some sort of forward momentum from Chicago, because it's not fun to watch a team that doesn't feel like they're going anywhere. Which leads us naturally to the stuff this offseason that has me go, I'm not necessarily saying bad, but maybe just a little confusing. I'm having trouble seeing the through line I don't know where all of this stuff is going. I think a big one that maybe went a little bit under the radar is obviously Emily Sams that happened last week to Angel City in exchange for $650,000 in intra-league transfer funds. Emily Sams, as we know, Defender of the Year for Orlando, a huge centerpiece to that run to the double for them in 2024. That's a big move. I certainly get it for Angel City, who have a thin center back core, have got to figure out a more sustainable style of football if they ever want to seriously become a title contender rather than just sort of a fun team that creates chaos every week. I know that there was some chatter, Hope, I saw this online, that it was going to be Jenna Neiswanger maybe making her way to Angel City on loan from Arsenal. I do think that Neiswanger watch is on. I'm curious to see if that loan turns into something to an NWSL side, or if she wants to really experience European competition somewhere else. But I don't also fully get where Orlando is going necessarily with this offseason. Haley Carter takes the sporting director gig with the Spirit. This morning, Orlando announced that former Kansas City general manager Caitlin Carducci will be taking over in that role for the Pride. They did a good job of remaining very competitive after Barbara Banda went down last season, and hopefully it's not like she's going anywhere this year. But for a project that felt as fully formed as it was after that pretty perfect 2024, I feel like with every consecutive year, it starts to get a little bit muddier, a little bit muddier. The team's defensive rigor was not as strong in 2025 as it was in 2024. I'm curious how they get that identity back this season, or does Orlando become a more open team? Is it a little bit more of a free-flowing back and forth? They are conceding some things on the back line to make things work in the midfield and the forward line. I don't know. I'm very curious to see what we see from Orlando. I think they deserve our patience and our respect based on what happened in 2024. But there seems to be a lot of individual data points that point to maybe something a little bit less cohesive than what we've seen for them in the past. And speaking of, I think the other thing that I have a lot of questions about is just literally everything going on with the Kansas City Current. There's been so much change in Kansas City for a team that won the most games in NWSL history, at this point, less than a year ago. It's been really, really interesting to see a team do as well as they did. And I'm not discounting the playoff, disappointment, but man, they were so good and so united, and they had an interesting style of play, and they had a head coach that seemed like they were taking them somewhere. And then their offseason has been more indicative of a team in crisis than a team that knows how they want to play, or they want to keep, the same consistency as they did last year. Vlatko Andonovski, head coach, steps away from head coaching to become the sole sporting director, and then does not become the key advisor for his own replacement. That honor went to Canada men's national team head coach Jesse Marsh because he is friends with ownership. So already we're seeing changes where there's a change on the sideline. Andonovski says, I want to have a larger overarching look at what's happening in Kansas City to make this club strong for years to come, and then immediately gets sidelined with his own replacement hiring. Not great. The club goes on to hire former MLS manager Chris Armas as head coach. He has very little women's soccer experience. He doesn't have an incredible track record in MLS either. This is, again, very wait and see. I don't know. Maybe he's perfect for women's professional soccer, but there's not a lot on the resume that indicates that that's the case. And again, I don't understand how maybe a coach with that resume requires kind of superseding some of those processes that are really important when figuring out who's going to be your head coach. So again, after a near perfect regular season and again, a very disappointing playoff collapse, the Current have a coach that their sporting director and their general manager did not spearhead the hiring of, and a roster that has seen some departures. And we'll probably go into that a little bit more as we work through the preseason weeks. There's probably a longer rant for me here somewhere. I don't understand the hiring practices of NWSL teams sometimes, where general managers don't hire coaches, and coaches don't have any inputs on other parts of the front office, and ownership calls their own shots without additional input, or maybe it all goes to like a third-party consultant who kind of puts this all together for a team without the team really knowing what they're doing, and no one has front office chemistry until the whole cycle starts all over again. You see general managers come and go in the NWSL a lot, where maybe head coaches stay. You see coaches get fired by someone who is not the general manager, maybe because the general manager is new. I don't know if maybe soccer specifically this all works out in its own way, but I do know in American sports, usually the most successful teams have a consistent through line of front office members working together because they were part of bringing those people in. And I just think that Kansas City is pulling a lot of disparate parts together, again, without me really understanding why, considering the success that they've been having. Their playoff defeat warranted some tinkering. I'm not saying that that is not the case, but this level of change does not bode well for consistency. Or at the very least, what if they have a slow start this year? What if they're trying to change the style of play? And it's just sort of that step back or that lateral movement that I just don't think one playoff game supports. And they also haven't necessarily proved how any of this makes them better in a knockout structure either. So a project to watch. Again, they deserve our patience. They deserve our respect. But I don't feel like I totally understand what's going on. And I worry sometimes about these little things in the front office really playing out on the pitch. And then before we go, this is just real rapid fire. This is not exhaustive. This is not every single signing, but just a couple quick college signings I wanted to shout out. Players that we'd be talking about if there was a draft. I'm trying to figure out how to hype up some of these rookies here in this new structure without a draft. We're going to figure it out. We're going to be like, here are the college players to watch. We'll go longer on this later, but I don't want them to get lost in the shuffle. We are seeing maybe the larger picture. We're seeing a lot of blue chip program signings out of the ACC early. And that's no real surprise after that conference has dominated college soccer in recent years over the last couple of years. You're seeing a lot of signings out of Stanford, out of Duke, out of Florida State, out of Notre Dame. You're seeing those blue chip programs kind of siphon in these new NWSL veterans to come, including, and here are some of the names that stuck out to me. I want to talk about Jasmine Akey, a very strong signing for Denver. She just won the Mac Herman Trophy, which is the trophy given to the best player in college soccer after her senior season at Stanford. She was the leading scorer in the ACC this season, a standout leader for that team. That is one of the most surefire signings from this college group, I think. Sometimes life is hard for rookie forwards in the NWSL. You don't want to place too many expectations on a player to score too soon. But Akey going to Denver is really good. I think that Denver is putting together kind of, again, a very quote unquote classic NWSL team. Seems like they have good scouting in college. It seems like they're signing a lot of league veterans that we know can do what they need to do. And I'm just not surprised that Kurt Johnson is putting together a team that feels like something you might have seen 7 or 8 years ago. And I don't even necessarily mean that in a bad way. I think sometimes that's a good tone to set for an expansion team. I want to talk about Leah Godfrey, an already experienced midfield option now for San Diego, signed to San Diego out of Virginia. She is an interesting archetype to me because in this new era of women's soccer, that is a player that I think could have come out of college sooner. I think you saw a lot more buzz maybe for Godfrey, 2 years ago or so when she was a younger player, but she stayed at Virginia. She became, she got that experience. She kind of arrives fully formed in that way that we're used to college players arriving, again, before you saw players sign with professional clubs at a younger age, a long college career. I'm always really interested to see what those players look like. Sometimes that's exactly what a player needs. I think you look at Croy Bethune. Croy Bethune is like the college success story, even in this new era of college versus professional soccer. But you also sometimes see players plateau because they haven't necessarily been moving up in sort of the difficulty of what they've been doing. So I think Godfrey is a very interesting prospect for San Diego. And then two others I want to mention are Taylor Suarez, a recent NCAA champion midfielder with Florida State, now on her way to Angel City. Angel City is doing some stuff. I don't know if it's all going to be put together correctly. I don't know if Strauss is the guy for the head coach, but I like some of the roster building that they're doing and at least getting very solid individuals to come together to try to make this into something. And then I wanted to shout it out, Andrea Kitahata, another Stanford standout, now signing on as a forward for Gotham. This is a good fit. Gotham needs a player like her after Ella Stevens moved on to sign with Boston. Just some good stuff here from the college era. So we're going to talk about that probably more. We're going to be talking about all of this probably more. But you just want to hit on some of these data points. And I think it's interesting to talk about it now because things will be unveiled. Things are going to develop. We're going to figure out what things are good, what things are bad. We're going to see players move out, players move in. We're going to, none of this is set in stone just yet. But I think the preseason is coming up very, very quickly, and teams have less time to figure all of this out than ever. So interesting times for the NWSL. Can't wait to see how all of this shakes out. The Late Sub is part of the Just Women Sports Network. This show is written by Claire Watkins and produced and edited by Parker Fenton. To get more of your favorite women's sports content, subscribe to the Just Women Sports newsletter and follow Just Women Sports across all your favorite channels.